I go. That's about.
I'm missing my computer again.
Hey. Where's his job?
Alrighty. Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, November 1st, 2022. Okay. First item that is marked on the agenda by the staff for discussion this afternoon is A7 on page 2. Are there any items prior to A7 that we need to discuss or have anyone has questions on in particular? All right, we'll go to A7 then.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to invite Katie and Melissa from Bauslog Insurance to present on this item.
Welcome, Katie.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm Katie Lorsman with Bauslog Insurance, and we are proposing the builder's risk policy for the new public services maintenance facility to be written with Selective Insurance. The building will be covered for just under $25 million. This amount was determined based on the hard costs of the construction project. We also included coverage for materials in transit and a temporary location, both at $250,000. The deductible will be $10,000 per occurrence, and the total annual premium is $26,407. This policy would be prorated upon cancellation. So if it cancels midterm, you would get a prorated refund. We did submit this coverage for quotes with 3 other carriers, but based on eligibility, cost, and coverage, Selective was our best option. Selective is a regional carrier, headquartered out of New Jersey with an A+ financial rating. They have been very competitive on builder's risk coverage for many years. Let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, and we'll go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that caught my eye, Katie, was that our current insurer of ICAP could not quote it because it's too large.
Correct.
I guess that either 1 surprised me and 2 probably disappointed me that our current carrier is not able to give us coverage on something that is very straightforward. So can you explain why this is
You know, I
above their
think
limits?
they go up to around 12 to 15 million, and it's due to their reinsurance. That's what they're comfortable with. That's kind of their wheelhouse. So that's why we go outside of there. I mean, Liberty Mutual would have done it. They just wanted extra underwriting. I think the cost also, Selective is actually better on cost than ICAP based off of, you know, what we've seen with builder's risk.
So is it pretty common then to have to go outside for this kind of a policy coverage?
Based on how large it is, yes, it is. So I mean, certain companies specialize in builder's risk. Selective is one of them. So, you know, again, Liberty Mutual is the same.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Well, sort of dovetailing on Steve's question, does that suggest that ICAP wouldn't be able to just on a regular constructed basis be able to cover that building?
They will cover it on the property policy. Yes, they will. We can add it on, and it's actually a blanket form. So we would add all property onto that policy. Builder's risk is a different form of coverage. So, you know, some companies aren't as comfortable with the building process as others.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Anyone else? The questions, Randy? You're the insurance guy. All right, anyone else?
I think it's actually a very competitive quote
Yeah.
based on what we've seen.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next item that's marked for discussion is C1. Are you happy with it?
Yeah.
That matters.
Good afternoon. Hey, this is for the Public Safety Communication Center dispatchers. So we dispatch for police, fire, and the ambulances here. We average about 29,000 calls a year. We've got an FSL, a staffing level of 9. We're currently down to 6 fully trained We've got 2 that are in training that are on board. And then we got a letter of resignation. So we're going to be down 2 full bodies here by next week. So what we'd like to do is the hiring process itself. We don't think we'll have anybody on board until January by the time we test and do the backgrounds and everything. So what we'd like to do is try to supplement our numbers using part-time people. There's other dispatchers for other agencies. There's been some interest expressed that they would come over here and work, fill in some of the hours for us. Certain shifts are busier than others, so we have a 2-person minimum. So one person can answer the phone while the other one's actually dispatching to the police and fire units. We've had to fill a lot of spots with overtime. The forced overtime is getting to be a problem for the ones that are on board. So what I did is I worked it out with the union. The contract actually allows me to declare an emergency for personnel staffing reasons. So I went ahead and did that, which basically means I can move people where I need them. So what happened when we had the one operator who put in her letter of resignation, she was the only one left scheduled to work the overnight shift. So that left us with 0 people that had bid for the overnight shift. So I got with the union president. We got voluntary compliance on filling all 3 shifts for the time being. That's going to go until January 14th. And then they'll rebid at that point. In the MOU that's attached, I think that's the next item. If you guys agree to this, basically what we decided to do was the full-time employees will get first dibs on any overtime. If they choose to work it, they can have it. If they don't want to work it, we'll call up any part-time people that we have on our list to see if they want to work it. If none of them take it, then we'll go back to forcing our full-time employees. My hope is that we can get 1 or 2 of these shifts covered every week, and it'll cut down on the amount of forced overtime we have. The pay is going to be just under $25 an hour, which is what our starting dispatchers make. It's actually cheaper than overtime. But again, for me, it's not necessarily the money as much as it is the morale and the number of hours they're having to put in. Is there any questions about that? Does that make sense?
Have we used part-time?
We
For
haven't.
people
No,
before?
this is a first for us. And like I say, Rhonda Kaczynski, the manager, had put some calls out and got some positive comments back from people that were actually interested in it. So I think if you guys approve this on Thursday and the MOU gets signed, we'll probably start advertising as early as Monday and maybe just keep it open so we can keep a running list of part-time people. Again, the emergency declaration will be over January 14th. But what we'd like to do is to be able to keep these folks on board or on a list that we can use them in the future. As if our numbers dip below 9, we can possibly call these part-timers again. And it's not, again, the union folks get first dibs on any of the overtime, but if they all decline, then we'll go to the part-timers and see if they can fill it.
And these obviously would be people that already have all the training.
Yes. Yep. They'll already be certified in NCIC, so they'll be able to step right in.
Questions? Go
Yeah,
ahead, Steve.
just quick, Chief. So the slide up here is calling it, talking about an emergency need and using the word temporary. But the way you described it and the way it seems to me is this is going to be an ongoing need. So is this really just going to become a new policy, a new position that as needed is always going to be available for you to use?
Yep.
So you
So I
don't
think-
have to be declaring an emergency all the time. So I mean, is this an ongoing usage that you
Yeah.
anticipate?
The emergency declaration just had to do with the bid. So we were able to put people in shifts, assign them to a shift without having them bid for it because they've already got their bid assignments on days off. The emergency allowed me to move people around where I needed to. The part-time piece is going to fill in during that time period. But to me, it makes sense if we've already got people approved. If we go below our staffing level in the future, why not have that option
As an ongoing
as an
situation?
ongoing? Yes, sir.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Yeah, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Chief. So is this one individual or one slot, or is this multiple slots that you're trying to?
So
have
we're hiring
available?
for 2 now that we've got, we were 1 down and we had already started the hiring process. Then we got the letter of resignation last week for the other one. So we'll be hiring 2. The part-time people, I think we could take as many as we could get because if we go down that list, if we've got an overnight shift, well, the first one doesn't want it. Let's go through every one of them to see if anybody's available before we have to force our own employees.
Well, I guess, and I think multiple in this temporary part-time role is useful. And, you know, we're on the heels of a pandemic. And, you know, who knows, again, if we have something that circulates through the population that takes a bite out of a given area. I think in terms of service resiliency and delivery, having some depth of capability against this model will keep us out of a hurt locker. So I guess I'm glad to hear your thinking in terms of multiples.
I think that's it, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, C3 through. All the way to F2 on the next page are not marked. Any questions on any of those items or any needed discussion?
Your Honor,
Yes, sir.
on E10.
Yep.
Resolution accepting public improvements associated with the Ridge at Indian Creek Second. As I looked at that memo, it referenced, and I can pull it up here, but I think that memo itself referenced that the deferment agreement for Tower Terrace Road is on the same council agenda. Is that something we're covering yet this week? All I'm keying in on is the staff memo for this references that deferment agreement.
But that is not on the agenda.
I'm sorry?
The deferment agreement is not on the agenda.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
reference in the memo was
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
okay,
Yep.
thanks.
So apologize for that, but that should come back. They have surety in place for the improvements. So we'll bring that back before the surety expires, but we're working on that deferment agreement currently.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Anyone else with questions on any item before F3 on page 4? All right, we'll go to F3 then.
Okay, this is a request from Marion Cares for additional support for the Family Assistance Program. In the request, they had requested 50,000. On the agenda is authorizing payment in the amount of 60,000. They came in again for the Family Assistance Program. It went to the subcommittee, and I'm sorry, I don't know which members are on the subcommittee, but they realized they had $6,000 or $10,000 more allocated. So they decided to award the entire 60,000 rather than the requested 50,000 for that program.
Any questions on that? So it's a recommendation to award 60,000 of the ARPA funds to Marion Cares.
And Mayor, I just have one additional thing I'll add to Dave's comments is that we will work with ECI COG to help us ensure that the reporting for ARPA funds is designated and appropriately done so through this process.
Thanks, Kim. Any questions on that? Okay, thanks, Dave. All right, for the next item, I'll turn over the meeting to the Mayor Pro Tem.
Carol, I think you advanced 2 slides. You're going to want to go back one. Thank you. This is a resolution authorizing the internal advance for funding of an urban renewal airport operating and support program for the Collins Road Extension Urban Renewal Area. This is a new item for City Council, so I wanted to make sure we gave a brief presentation. This is the final step in the urban renewal process. You would recall we did an urban renewal plan amendment at a previous meeting. This allows the city to certify debt for repayment through tax increment finance. This new program will offset airport operating costs, just as those you can see on the screen, includes actual fiscal year 2022 expenses and budgeted fiscal year 2023 expenses. And then you would expect to see a similar resolution on a go-forward basis through the term of the FBO lease. As City Council decides what we're going to do with the airport going forward, that would be a future discussion and a future consideration. Any questions?
I don't think so. Thank you.
I'm gonna hang up here because the next item is mine as well. Go ahead, Will.
Okay,
Back to the mayor then.
we're ready for the next item then. A2.
A2 is a resolution approving the agreement with ClearGov. You would recall last budget cycle, there were several corrections and reiterations of the budget book throughout the process. This was largely because we were manually updating Excel and Word documents and combining them in order to get that packet sent to council. This ClearGov software is a new tool that will allow us to export data directly out of our financial software and then have it imported into the new ClearGov system. The system will be able then to summarize the data and build charts and graphs directly into the system. But that's not all. Terrell, if you go ahead and advance. ClearGov is built and partnered with Government Finance Officers Association on the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. It pre-populates a lot of the data for us. And if you can see it on the screen, I provided a screenshot of the tool. It has a checklist with the GFOA criteria built in. Some of it, you can see some greens, it will automatically get pulled in. I'm going to pause there and see if you have any questions on that before I go to the second tool.
Questions?
So the ClearGov capital budgeting tool allows for scenario building in addition to the fact that departments will be able to directly enter in their information and build the project sheets in the software. It also will allow for prioritization to occur within the tool. And it also summarizes the data and feeds directly into the budget book. So you get this seamless document where we're not manually changing things. Any questions on that?
So Leanne, is the budget being prepared within our current software, or are numbers being exported into this software and then the budget is now being created out of this software?
At this time, the budget would still be created in the New World software, and we'd be working with Michael Maloney as we put that together at DA Davidson. This is really just putting the document together aside from the capital budgeting tool. So we're talking about two different modules within the software. There is an operating budget module that we could look at in the future. There is also a transparency module that we could look at in the future. This does include a limited version of transparency. So on the capital budgeting side, my answer would be yes, but on the overall budget side, no.
So, okay, so summarize very succinctly, what is the benefit from this software?
The
To
benefit
make
from
it look
this-
nice or what?
Both, well,
I'm sorry,
several things. Yes, it will make it look nice.
presentation wise?
Presentation wise, it will eliminate all of the work we're currently doing when it comes to basically pulling information out of our software,
Yeah.
putting it into pretty Excel documents to put that whole budget booklet together. So
Oh,
we
you're
run
skipping the
numerous
Excel
reports.
piece?
It will replace the Excel documents. It will replace the Microsoft Word documents.
Okay.
It will replace the numerous different reports, like you guys normally are looking at a budget worksheet report. It will replace all of those reports, pull them into a nice, pretty document for you, also for members of the public. That is the huge gain. The GFOA budget certification is just kind of frosting on top of the cake.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
So Leanne, is this in, this automates some of what is now a manual set of steps?
Yes,
And those manual set of steps currently can inject some potential error?
yes.
Okay, so this is in part an error reduction strategy, but then will this produce a publicly facing representation of our budget status?
Yes,
And will this at a future date also be the dashboarding mechanism by which we can represent project status?
to be determined.
Okay. Okay, so this automates some of what we're now manually doing, and it gives us the ability to have a meaningful representation publicly.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And then on the very first slide, I should have inputted again, just as a summary. We've committed to essentially 1 year, if you will. We've included and locked in pricing for the next 3 years, but we have the ability to cancel within 60 days. So it still will be considered as a budget improvement package, just as all the other departments in this next budget cycle. So it kind of gives us the ability to try out the software and see if we like it and see if we want to proceed with it.
Just maybe a comment that in a former life form, I've had some experience with this kind of dashboarding. And one of the things, once it's set up and once the transfer mechanisms are all aligned, the value that it provides, both in terms of labor saving, as well as allowing people to spend their time on higher value tasks versus converting spreadsheets. More than this more than is a cost saver overall. So I'm glad we're chasing something like this down.
City manager has a comment.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to add on to a comment that Leanne made about the frosting on the cake. This certainly does help increase efficiencies, but I think that frosting is really important for the work that we do. By having that check mark against the GFOA certification helps ensure that the efforts that we are doing in terms of budgeting helps align with best practices for communicating out a public document such as this. So I think this is a really good step and a part of the evolution process that we're going through with our budget process to really reach higher and show the community in a very simple, easy to digest format how we are spending their tax dollars.
Very good. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Leanne. Okay, I didn't ask for questions on A1 prior to the item that we just discussed. Any questions on A1? This is the public hearing on the sale of the Gowan House property. Okay. Then E1 through F2 are not marked. Any questions on those? F3, is that you, Dave?
As I was sitting there, I realized, I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago, so this is just really a quick rehash, but this is a resolution approving the ITC plat located at 144th Street. Plat there is on the screen. It's a single lot, just over 14 acres. It'll be the future site of an electrical substation that was approved a couple of years ago through the conditional use process with the zoning board of adjustment. Preliminary plats are only good for 2 years unless you final plat some portion of it. They did not final plat any portion. They were busy bringing lines to that area. If you remember, a couple of years ago, they were upgrading the Highway 100 lines as well as one of the lines in the metro area. So they failed to final plat it. They're ready now to begin this project, so they have to renew their preliminary plat, and that's why we're seeing it again from its original 2019 approval. This did go to the Planning and Zoning Commission last month, and it was approved 7-0. I think there was questions on what it will look like. There's kind of a rendering that the ITC provided in the color one there. And then the drawing to the east, I kind of highlighted green to kind of illustrate some of the landscaping around the site. Again, this is just a plat of the land as far as the council is concerned, but it is a prominent corner for the substation. And again, it was approved to the zoning board of adjustment. So again, they recommended approval of the plat. Any questions?
Questions for Dave? Go ahead.
Dave, from the original concept to what they're planning for here, is there any substantive change to the size of the substation or its equipment and elevations of that equipment?
The overall fence footprint is supposed to stay the same. Some of the equipment inside may change and they indicate to be less rather than more, but their engineers are still working through some of those details. So.
Okay. All right, thanks.
But the landscaping package is still the
Yep.
same or similar.
Yep, and I'll push them for a little bit more once we get out there we all know it's takes a little while to get there, but we'll get there.
Yeah, and it is an entry point to the city, so I think the more we can do to get better screening would be great. Anyone else? Go ahead.
So this is, maybe this was, and I remember this from a couple weeks ago, but even before then, so this was approved quite a while ago that this substation can be built there. So
Yeah.
there's no change in that, right?
Correct.
Because what is the plan? This is a corridor. This is our commercial corridor. So it's not, what is planned for the other lots as you go along Highway 100? It's still privately owned, but as you go from, I'm looking at my map, like from 44th down toward Highway 13, back the other direction, there's apartments. Across from it is the park. Or are we too far up from the park?
No, it's
You're
Right across from
park
Squaw
and
Creek,
some
right?
Private
Or
land. is there
Wanatee?
too. Yep.
Um,
If I can address, to the east, it's the old lagoon, it's some city-owned property, likely would not see any development. Then as you keep going east toward Highway 13, you kind of cross the creek there. That gets onto private property. We've been working with the landowner there to develop a kind of a master plan over about like 160 acres on that site. Looking at all sorts of things from the big commercial, mixed use, maybe some recreational facilities. Obviously the south side, you get the park for majority of it. As you continue west on the south side, it does get picked up by the Bjornson family, and they have some office mixed use multifamily type designation on the south side. And then as you go west, predominantly, I don't have a zoning map in front of me. I believe it was all commercial. Again, some multi-use, multifamily along all the way to 35th. Then obviously, as you go north, you're running mostly into the city property, so it's all got an industrial designation. There's one 10-acre piece immediately west of this. Actually, the former owner of this property still owns about 10 acres there. It's designated for, I believe, multifamily commercial as well.
so why does it have to go there?
I think this is, I don't know. This is how they designed the lines, and this is where they felt it served the greater good of their infrastructure. Actually, and there is a line that goes, ITC does have a major line that goes up east of 44th Street. There's a major, it goes all the way up to the landfill and beyond. They have a major transmission line there. So I'm assuming this substation facilitates that line that's existing.
Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Okay. F4.
All right, F4 and really F5. There'll be a public hearing on Thursday regarding the proposed rezoning for the property located west of Winslow Road. You saw this several months ago. He coming with the mixed use condo development, single family home development. It was denied. He heard what was said, took it back to the commission, and is proposing 32 single family detached residential lots. So just traditional residential single family, just over 10 acres, I believe. Property's highlighted there on the screen. We did the zoning map on the screen there. It's pretty compatible with all the existing uses. To the south is that senior center. It was called, but senior center, nursing home. So single family is normally considered compatible with that. To the west, it's all ag. It's mostly floodplain, unusable. To the north, you got Tower Terrace. And then beyond Tower Terrace, obviously, we have some commercial uses to the north. Then mostly to the east is all single family, from traditional size lots up to 1 acre lots for some former county property. The comprehensive plan designates the property for traditional single family homes, so there'll be no amendment to the comprehensive plan. Plat is not on the agenda until the rezoning is complete, but I have provided that for your review. It's in the staff report as well. Again, 32 single family lots. The roads will be accessed off of Winslow Road. Osage Court will be public, and then Osage Trail will be a private drive. We've allowed that on limited basis when there's not a lot of traffic needing to utilize it. And it does incorporate that existing house. It sits quite a ways back into that development as well. But that will be at the probably the second meeting in December that you'll see the preliminary plat, should the rezoning be approved. And the commission did meet on this last month, and they did recommend approval of both the rezoning and the preliminary plat.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dave, just, I know this illustration that's up on the screen right now, we're kind of ahead of ourselves, but I'm just curious, what are the nominal widths, lot width sizing?
I believe they're 80 feet.
Okay.
Second, a little smudged on the drawing there.
And is,
We're looking at about 80 to 85 feet by 120 plus feet. So slightly oversized.
certainly looks like they were responsive to our collective concern. So.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dave.
All right, thanks.
All right, the next item is a discussion regarding city council meeting schedule.
Thank you, Your Honor. During one of my check-ins, I don't remember quite which one, and my apologies on that, but the question came up at some point, we should take a look at how our city council meeting schedules are done. And during a recent meeting with Rachel, as we were kind of planning out FY20 or the calendar year 23 meeting schedule, we thought that this would be a good opportunity to bring this forward to the council, see, does the current meeting schedule work well? If not, we did provide some examples of what our comparables do. That's in the packet. We also have 2 slides with that to just take the temperature of the council. When we as staff contemplated this and we're preparing for today, we do like the fact that we have the Thursday. Tuesday allows us to go through and in hopes of having Thursday a little bit more efficient with the business aspect of it. It does allow us to be a little bit more nimble as things arise. We do have that Wednesday to add something onto the agenda for Thursday if it happens. Certainly adds a little bit more meetings in the week, but to allow for some proper discussion. And then again, that adaptability is something that we felt was beneficial. If the council's amenable to keeping that current meeting schedule, what we would suggest is possibly revamping or reworking how we do Tuesdays and really focus it more on discussion and presentations, and then perhaps towards the end of the meeting, do a quick run through of the agenda, much like we do now, but really put more of the emphasis on true work session type items. Hey, these are the items that we got coming up. These are policy implications that we need your input on, not necessarily for the Thursday, but also as we proceed along with big ticket items. You know, we're going to have a presentation about traffic, or not traffic, I'm sorry, transit. And the transit discussions we've had with Horizons and Cedar Rapids. So that's an example of a work session item that presenting, but not necessarily set up for the Thursday meeting. So if the council does prefer to keep the Tuesday, Thursday, if that works well for your schedules, we do want to be respectful of that. You are volunteers that take time out of your day to work on behalf of our community. So that would be our recommendation. If there is a desire to change it and really focus in on one meeting, one business meeting, we did identify Iowa City as something that seems a little bit more amenable to our operations. First and third Tuesdays, we do like keeping the Tuesdays as opposed to a Monday or some other day of the week. And then have it structured where we do the work session. So you can do it presentations key discussion direction items and then roll into your business meeting at 6 o'clock. Obviously, we'd have to do some fine tuning on this based on any sort of feedback that you have. But we wanted to give you some sort of recommendations to help facilitate your conversation.
Okay, so are you looking for questions,
Just-
feedback?
Yeah, looking for questions, feedback. If no changes is the answer, then that's what it is. And but we certainly wanted to be responsive to the request and see if, does it work for everybody? If not, we can look at changing. Now would be the time as we're getting ready to set up the 23 schedule.
Grant had a question and then Colette.
So as I thought about this, it seemed to me that there's two dynamics to this. Number one is what best meets the cadence of activity that your team has to support in terms of the integration of decision making, presenting issues that are high priority. Which of these versions really are best supportive of the city's cadence of delivery?
Right now, when we talked about it, the Tuesday, Thursday works because it gives us time. Now, there's a little bit more preparation that's required. You're preparing for 2 meetings as opposed to 1. But the preparation for Tuesday and the work that happens today oftentimes does help inform some of the stuff that we're doing Thursday or future meetings. So we do have some efficiencies there. The agenda packet's pretty much already prepared. Tomorrow we're gonna have staff meeting and I've already got some notes that we'll address some of the points that have been raised here, some follow-up questions. So this works well for the cadence standpoint. There's one other point I had that escaped me, so I'll come back to it if it comes back to my memory. Sorry.
Okay, we'll go to Colette and then if it comes back, just let us know. Go ahead.
Thank you.
It will come back, I'm sure of it. But I think that's a great question, Grant. One of the things, I'm not sure how you resolve this, but one of the things that I think about is with the work session on Tuesday starting at 4 and especially on Tuesday at 4, I think that's probably hard for folks to participate in, right? And so as we continue to really want to think about how do we get more people interested in serving their community, a 4 o'clock start time is hard. And so I don't have a solution, which is why I'm a little, hesitant in bringing that forward, acknowledging that, it's great to point out a problem and easy if you don't have a solution. But I think that's something we should be thinking about, both from folks coming to at least hear what we have to say. Then also I think about if you actually want to, run to be an elected official, that oftentimes just takes you out of the, ability to participate if it's always a Tuesday at 4 o'clock. So I'm not sure if you have some ideas on that or if that was part of your discussion at all.
We did discuss that. And the work session, no actions taken during the work session. And so when we have our public hearings, that's during your business meeting. So on your Thursday meetings, and that's the start time at 6 o'clock. A little later, we did bring up, and I think we accurately identified you as the one that would bring up this question. And that we talked about a little bit, and I'm going to look at some of those that have been here longer, that at one point it was a little later, 7 or 7:30 at night, 7 o'clock. And so a previous council made a determination to move it to 6. One thing that we did talk about that has factored into kind of leaving it at the 6 was the ability to participate via Zoom.
5:30.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at the slide. 5:30. What I'm looking at on the slide is the 6 o'clock for the Iowa City version. What we talked about was with the current time is the accessibility of Zoom with the COVID and the participation that affords. But that's something that any organization I've ever been a part of has always struggled with. What is the most convenient time? And what are the ways that we go out and communicate and share this and provide opportunities for our residents to engage with their government. The, another, I'll come back. Sorry.
So I think from go ahead.
So one question I have is the majority of the cities do it all in one session. So how are they doing it so much differently than what we're doing in two?
They're having a work session before their meeting.
Correct.
So you have to.
All of them are having a work session before?
You noticed I think most of them
Yeah.
are having their work session before the meeting. So it's just done in one day rather than 2 days. And
So they just do them back to back?
Yeah.
Yes.
so I guess I'll go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Okay, that answers
Yeah.
that part, which I didn't know. So, I mean, a comment I have is the only thing I know is this schedule.
Right.
So I don't know what the benefits would be for any other schedule. Although sometimes having Tuesday and then you vote on Thursday, it gives you time to do a little more research on a few subjects here and there when needed. So sometimes that's beneficial, not always, but sometimes. The other question I would have is if you do it all in one night, when do you hold closed session meetings? Are they always right after that meeting and it makes it just a very long night, or when are those held?
So that would be some of the additional work that we would need to do if there's a desire to go to the one meeting. One example that I'm familiar with was my time in Highland Park. We had first and I think it was second and fourth Mondays. But we would start at 4 o'clock. We would do closed session at 4 o'clock, and then we'd go into what we referred to as committee of the whole or the work session, have about an hour and a half to 2 hours of the work session, break for dinner. We'd have dinner at City Hall and then go at 7 o'clock into your business meeting. So there's different ways to personally, from a professional standpoint, and we've had situations like this where we've had the council meeting, we've had closed session to talk about a closed session item that was on the agenda before. So there makes some business sense to have the closed session ahead of time. And if we have to prep council for action items that occur on that business agenda.
Yeah, personally, I'm okay as it is. I'm not sure I'm seeing a huge benefit to changing all in one night. I mean, most other cities are doing it that manner, but personally, I'm not seeing a huge benefit to change.
If I
See what
can,
everybody else thinks.
if I can work backwards, I remembered what I was going to say to Councilwoman Atkins and Councilman Harper. With the time for the participation, so not only do we have Zoom, but one of the things that we as a staff are trying to do is be more proactive in our calendaring of topics that we are presenting to you. So we're trying to bring things to you ahead of time. So it's not a Tuesday and then a Thursday vote. So if we continue to improve how we schedule the action items that come before you on a Tuesday, then at least we're telegraphing to the community with a significant amount of time, as best as we can. Tuesday, here's some discussion items. We're getting direction from council. By the way, this will be on the business agenda, the Thursday meeting, a couple meetings down the road. So that's again why the Thursday would be scheduled later than the work session. So there is that balance there. What that sweet spot is, we'll continue to try to find that. And then Councilman Harper, the cadence that you had asked about, I want to respond back. Having at least two business meetings a month is what's important. We need to make sure we have action. We need to have bills paid. There's things that come up. So the cadence that works for us, the once a week or the one meeting for the Iowa City version would work because it is spaced out every other week. That would allow us to make sure that we're paying the bills and we're getting that frequency that we need to have before council.
Go ahead.
So on that point, however, is there a material difference between the Iowa City model? So that's work session, regular session on one night every other week. Is there compelling value to separate the work session from the regular session within the meeting week that is superior to what Iowa City is doing? I guess what I'm trying to, I think we have two constituencies. We're trying to represent the thinking of the community and do our best to represent our constituency. But the other thing is that we need to help propel all of you as to be as efficient, as effective, as impactful as possible. And so I'm stuck on what optimizes those elements. And you know, I'm like Steve, I've not experienced anything else other than this, but I can't conjure up in my own mind why we would do anything different.
Right. I would say this is the first community that I've been at where we've had two essentially council meetings in 1 week. I find this very valuable because it allows us to touch points with you multiple times during a week. So the Tuesday is nice because as we quickly go through the agenda for Thursday, we can kind of get a temperature of where you're at, or if there are questions that we can be better prepared for. I mean, that's our ultimate desire, is make sure we're presenting you with all the information you need to make your informed decision. So I personally and professionally, and what we talked about as a team, it gives us as staff good information from you to prepare for that business meeting. The business meeting is the critical function that we have to look at. And so ideally, that's why our recommendation would to keep the status quo, but allow us to rework how we work on our Tuesday meetings. And focus more on the presentation, with the back part of the meeting really kind of going over the agenda like we do now. We spend more time Tuesdays focusing in on the agenda and less time on the discussion items. I mean, it really boils down to, and I think just the rationale with some of these other communities that do it, one, you know, like Iowa City, again, your volunteers, many of you have day jobs. It's difficult for you to give up 2 times during a week. So do you want to have one meeting and just get it all done, or do you want to spread that out? Just it ultimately boils down to what's best for you. I mean, we are here to support you and make sure you have the information you need and not overtax your willingness to serve, because that Councilwoman Atkins, that's, you know, how do we get people to be engaged and want to volunteer? It's how do we make it as easy as possible for them?
Okay. From my perspective, I think that, well, the cities that don't have a back-to-back work session or work session and business meeting, they have to be doing something else, like Cedar Rapids. Okay, they have, in the interim, they have committees, and all the council members are in committees. Do you have to have some method to to learn about the items and to engage in questions and all that kind of stuff? The business meeting, and I think that we all could work on how we use these meetings. But let me just go back. From my perspective, after a long day at work, where I'm using my brain 500%, I mean, I only have so much capacity I can't do a 4-hour meeting after work. You know, at some point my brain just shuts down. And you know, I mean, I'm not saying don't change it for me, but I'm just saying from my perspective, I start early in the morning, sometimes 5, 6 in the morning. You know, by the time I get here, I don't want to have a 4-hour meeting. So, I mean, the way we have it, I think works well. The purpose of from the public's perspective, it's really the business meeting that, you know, where they get to engage with the council, they get to comment at public hearings, they get to comment during the comment sections. So from the public's perspective, it's the 5:30 Thursday meeting is the meeting. The purpose of the Tuesday meeting, as I always understood it, was for the council to understand what's on the agenda for Thursday, to ask all our questions. So this is sometimes I've mentioned it on Thursdays and said, you know, we really should be asking these questions on Tuesday, not on Thursday. Sometimes you're going to have a question that pops up because of the discussion. But in general, by Thursday, the council should understand everything that's on the agenda. We should have done our homework and then be ready to vote on Thursday. So that's, you know, that's the purpose of the Tuesday meeting. I like the idea of also, and we've talked a lot about it before, of not having something presented on Tuesday and then vote on Thursday. So that I like the idea of having items presented by the staff or having discussions or presentations, you know, several weeks in advance or a month in advance. Let us know this is coming down the road. I don't want to, personally, I don't want to take away the opportunity to really ask the questions and to go through the agenda on Tuesday, because that's the time. We don't have committees. That's the time when the council can ask the questions of all the staff to make sure they understand everything, and then have a little time to do their homework between Tuesday and Thursday. If there's still, you know, more for them to do to make up their mind how they're going to vote on something. On Thursday, the discussion should really be less between council and staff as it is between council members. So if I want to convince the rest of the council to vote this way or that way, that's the discussion that happens in the business meeting. It's a business meeting between the council members. And that's where the discussion should be, was making sure, you know, or trying to get people, the council members who are voting, to understand your position and to convince them with your reasoning on voting one way or another. That's really what should be happening on Thursdays as far as discussions. So you had something to add, Brian?
I do. And just that is how we've, over the last 11 months, how we've been using Tuesday. We staff have been using the Tuesday meetings. As you mentioned, Mayor, we do go through and flag those items that we think are going to be important to council, and that's why we highlight them in gray so we can provide the presentation and some of the background. We are doing our best to reach higher in bringing council along and the community along, and with the Tuesday meetings and doing the presentations so that you are getting them well in advance of being asked to make formal decisions, important formal decisions. So the way we are using the Tuesdays is different than historically has been done for the organization. And so that's why when we staff developed our recommendation, we say we like the Tuesday, Thursday, because it allows that additional touch point with the council. But we would suggest kind of reversing it. So I hope this makes sense, but the agenda that you see today would not be the agenda. You'd have an agenda that shows work session, item 1, presentation regarding transit, item 2, presentation regarding whatever, item 3, review council agenda for proposed council agenda for Thursday. And then we would still go through this exercise, but really put the emphasis on the presentations, the discussion and direction on those key items. Because if we're doing that, we're getting more to that proactive state. Those presentations, that should lessen the amount of questions that would come as you're reviewing the agenda later on. Does that make sense? And so one thing we talked about at staff meeting last week was there seems to be a lot of stuff in flux right now. And that's because we as an organization, we're growing up, Mayor. A lot of this change is happening. We're living this change at the very moment. So, you know, the Tuesday meetings, how we've been slowly incorporating the discussion and direction in some of those presentations for the purpose of not blindsiding council and giving you opportunity to provide the input, bringing you along, not having you see something on a Tuesday and make a decision on a Thursday.
And it requires us as council to come to the Tuesday meeting prepared so that we have all, so we can ask all our questions and to make sure that, you know, we understand it enough to be able to know what information we still need. So that we're not on Thursday, then, you know, thinking about it for the first time and thinking, oh, well, I have this question, or, you know, I mean, it's not always going to be that ideal. I get it. You know, people are busy and, you know, but ideally we come prepared to Tuesday, we get the presentations, then we see what's on the agenda. We know what's on the agenda, and we get to ask our questions and be able to think about it for the next couple of days some more, or talk to people we need to talk to, or visit the site, if it's a development or something like that. And then on Thursday, we discuss with each other how we feel, why we feel the way we feel on it, and then vote on the items on the agenda. So that's ideally how I envision it works. But you have a question? Go ahead.
Well, I think it seems like the Tuesday, Thursday meeting cycle, there's value to maintain that, with perhaps then some modifications on Tuesday. The outstanding question is, and it's one Colette, I think, has mentioned, is, you know, do we want to change the time for the Tuesday meeting? I think that's just fundamental a question in order to allow potentially some either additional public participation, or perhaps stimulate people who might ultimately at some future date want to be a council member.
Yeah, that's a valid question.
I guess I'd be, you know, from my personal standpoint, you know, 5:30 Tuesday, 5:30 Thursday puts some uniformity as what we're doing week in and week out. I don't know how that maybe advantages the work effort that the collective city staff has. Maybe it aids and abets being ready for supporting discussion on the Tuesday sessions. You know, so Colette, tell me if I'm wrong or misinterpreting what you were going after.
No, I think you heard me loud and clear. It wasn't about folks participating on Tuesday, right? It was about the idea that if you want to be an elected official, that, you know, it's difficult if you're working full-time or you're a young parent to commit to 4 o'clock every Tuesday for several, right, iterations. So I think you're spot on this idea of, is there the ability for us to think about, you know, having something a little later on? It clearly is working for me, right? But I'm not going to be here forever. And I think we want to make sure that we create an environment where we're really encouraging our folks to, you know, participate and want to be on city council. So that is exactly what I was saying. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah?
I would just question, I get the consistency piece, but I also say we're kind of making a general assumption that people have evenings free, or that everybody works just till 5 o'clock. So I think that variation in the time kind of overlaps with a few people. And I think about people with young families, evenings are not great, or kids who are in activities, evenings aren't great. So I don't think there's a perfect time, and having a little variety in the schedule to allow for people to manage that and have options is another way to look at it too, because we're kind of just looking at one population when we're thinking that, you know, evenings are free or evenings are better. Some people days are better. So I like a little variation. I guess I'm indifferent. I'll do with what works best for everybody as far as 1 day, 2 days. I see the sides on each. I think one thing that is hard if it's only once a week is that if you miss that, you miss a lot, because everything is in that one day, and now you got one meeting a month. But there's ways to be caught up, or for people to attend, or if you have something in front of council, it kind of narrows it. So I don't think I have strong feelings one way or the other, and I haven't been on here long enough to have seen differences. So I'll
Yeah.
go through.
And it's, you know, I mean, as far as everybody's going to have conflicts at some point. And, you know, but it's the Thursday meeting is the key meeting, I think, for people to be at. The work session, I don't want to say it's optional, because it's not optional, but it's, you know, if somebody has to miss that, you know, I don't think it's the end of the world, because that's where you get to ask your questions and learn about it. Then if you're doing it outside of that meeting, you know, that doesn't have to happen necessarily only in that meeting. It's the, you know, the voting and the official business meeting is the Thursday meeting. So. Any other comments? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, my final comment, I said, this is the only thing I've known, but I'd also prefer the Tuesday, Thursday over having, like you, one really long night. Because then if we have a closed session, a lot of times you're adding more time on top of that and you're out of here till 9 o'clock. So again, my vote would be to leave it as is versus trying to move it all into one night. And it kind of seems that the work session, somewhere, somehow, we all got to put that time in. So if it's not at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, when do you do it? And if you don't do it all in front of the business session, then you're gonna have to do it, you know, sometimes in committees during the day. And I'd prefer the 4 o'clock instead of carving out more time during the middle of the day.
Okay, go ahead, Colette.
Yeah, so perhaps what maybe an option is right, what I'm hearing is there's a suggestion to keep it Tuesday, Thursday, and to rework it which I think you've been doing, this idea that we get stuff on a Tuesday that's for a couple of meetings down the road, which gives us that time to think. And the timing is something that I think folks are a little different on. So, you know, maybe we give it a shot the way it is now with the changes you suggested and then sort of reevaluate, you know, 6-8 months down the road to see how we feel about it. Certainly, I think that would be a way to do this, or do that and change the Tuesday start to 4:30 or 5. Either way, I think, to make those changes that you're suggesting makes a lot of sense. And to keep the Tuesday, Thursday seems.
Anyone else we didn't hear from yet? Will, Randy? Yeah, you're good?
I'll just say that I agree with what Colette just said. And also comment too, when I first read the list of the comparable cities and how they only met twice a month basically, and sometimes for an hour only, made me think, how are they getting all their information? Are they getting their information behind closed doors and not out in the public? Obviously, I'm sure they're not. I'm not making any suggestions that they're doing anything wrong, but it just made me think that the way we do it, we seem to be getting our information in front of everybody versus potentially in another room.
In committees.
In committees, right, that no one else is at. So.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? What else? You good? Okay, how's that? Get what you need?
Yes,
Okay.
it will be an evolution. We'll work on it, but we have that tracking document where we, like ATV, fireworks, noise. We'll make sure we evaluate this in a couple months. Thank you.
Well, at the heart of it, we appreciate your constant, the staff's constant effort to improve how we do things and look at how we're doing things to see if there's room for improvement. That's the important part. So thank you. Okay, our next item is public services facility. Potential refinancing.
That conversation you just had was a great segue into this one. Speaking of items that we are wanting to bring forth in anticipation of future council action, this is one of those items. We have invited Michael Maloney from DA Davidson to speak about the public service facility and potential refinancing. I just wanted to remind City Council and members of the public that we are working to revamp our budget process, and that includes the capital improvement program. And I realize that this is a big project included in that capital improvement program. However, and we haven't given you the full CIP yet. We did have a conversation at October 4th council meeting about the capital improvement program as far as funding was concerned. However, this is one of those items that we need to move more quickly than we are moving with the CIP. And that is why we're bringing it forth now. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael Maloney.
Thanks for the introduction, Leanne. I appreciate it. We can go to the next slide and kind of the first page of content to get into this overall. I think Leanne hit the nail on the head. This is setting the stage for future action. There's a lot of content on this first slide, but I believe each of these figures has been reviewed with council in the recent future. So let's walk through them from top to bottom. One of the early September meetings, actuals for project costs incurred to date as of ending August 31, 2022, capital and operating were articulated to council as part of a staff presentation. To date, $7.252 million of project costs. That's included in the analysis that we're talking about. And we've been working with staff, the consultants and architects to clearly identify the remaining capital costs. Those are projected at about 27.8 million as of October estimate. We think that's the full cost. That includes contingency, allowances for IT, furniture, and security. I think there's some potential for some upside there, but that's what we're using for framing of total cost. And we've worked with that same team to better understand the timing of that spend in the coming year plus. So we've been working through this, and that's the reason for coming to council now to set the stage for future action at upcoming meetings to gain authority and then eventually execute the financing plan here. To re-anchor this again, back in 2020, the original financing provided proceeds of about 10.8 million. That has been drawn to utilize for project costs of the 7.2. So we've got about 2.6 million of remaining proceeds to apply to the project costs. That leaves a balance as articulated as a shade over 24 million there. That's what needs to be covered from additional financing at this time. So that's kind of the segment one, what's included in this conversation. This does not include the 1.675 million of related operating costs incurred that were presented to council at the end of August. That's on the downside. On the upside, there is no insurance claim or pending litigation offsets to the project costs or borrowing amounts. We know that is to be determined. The timing on those is also uncertain. Therefore, we need to make sure we have a financing plan that's going to cover our needs as project costs come in and allow the city to remain nimble as some of those other factors are determined. I appreciate there's a fair amount of detail there. We can come back and address those, but wanted to talk about what the overall plan of finance is. And I thought slide 3 does a good job. You've seen this before. You're going to see this often when you hear from me. When we talk about capital planning, it's about authority, capacity, and repayment. So we're going to hit on all 3 today. The reason Leanne and I wanted to bring this to you now was we want to start the process to gain authority. That's the public hearing process at the next council meeting later this month. That would allow the city to have authority to issue financing as of December. This is important because the city has been taking bids on certain elements of the project cost to date, and most of that will be completed later this month as well. So the time is right to proceed, hence Leanne's comments at the start of this conversation. From a capacity standpoint, this is going to be issued by revenue bonds, and we'll talk about that on the following slide. We're not going to have the type of geo debt capacity considerations we're going to be talking about in the future on the broader CIP plan. The final portion is repayment. We're going to provide a high level of that today. We've got some details to follow specific to the road use tax fund. The sewer and solid waste elements of this that we'll discuss will be folded into the comprehensive approach to the utility rate structure, tying into the discussions we had this summer when we analyzed both of those funds with some detail. So let's continue to the next slide and just reiterate a little bit about the source of financing, revenue bonds. So as you might expect, revenues are pledged to repay debt, which means it's not going to be property tax repayment. It's going to be repaid from those revenue sources. So that's a gross revenue pledge for road use taxes or a net revenue pledge for utility revenue debt, in this case, sanitary sewer and solid waste. I mentioned before, I'm going to say it again to be clear, these debt issuances will not impact the city's geo debt limit. So that's a conversation for another day, but not related to this portion of the CIP. I don't want to think the council is, we're deferring the discussion on utility rate impact here. We're analyzing that as we go along, but we want to take that comprehensive review as we work for the broader CIP elements for sanitary and sewer and solid waste. We'll talk a little bit about the timing and implementation of that. For those of you that read the accompanying memo for your council packet, you'll note the detailed timeline that articulates the necessary financing steps for each of those portions, and we can review that in greater detail as well. So let's go to slide 5. I think this is instructive in terms of the allocations between the projects. Per the memo, and then per Leanne's staff correspondence on this topic, staff's worked hard to better assign those allocations for the use of the project based on budgeted revenues. So the road use tax portion will be the lion's share, nearly 2/3 of the project cost at 64%. Sanitary sewer is going to be attributed about 12% and solid waste 24%. While there might be some smaller elements for the city funds that could contribute to this and benefit from this, these are the big 3 items, and the breakdown between these 3, whether it's 100% of the total or nearly 100% of the total, or what we want to stick with. And this is the basis for our outlining the financing plan as such. So the next steps, as I mentioned, the public hearing process to gain authority for financing are going to require separate hearings for each of these entities. And the dollar amount, the not to exceed threshold that were included in the memo and that we'll touch on momentarily, are included based on this allocation. So that's the concept from an authority standpoint. And then to execute the financing plan and make sure the project cash flow is sufficient to not interfere with the city's ongoing operations starting next spring, the most clear path to financing is going to be the road use tax portion. That's going to be the first executed. So we're going to get authority for everything, follow through with the road use tax portion, and then supplement the financing with the solid waste and the sanitary sewer considerations as we meet cash flow needs going forward. I've mentioned before, I'm going to mention again, this is a portion of the overall capital needs for sanitary sewer and solid waste, and we'll take that comprehensive look as we reevaluate rates, user rates in a similar manner to what we did this summer for the first time with both of those funds. Just going to pause there right now before getting a little more detail, but want to make sure there's any questions at this point before we continue in the last half of the presentation.
Looks like Steve has a question.
Yeah, I do. Hey, Michael, Steve Jensen here.
Yep.
When we talk about the debt being used, is everything, all the debt you're talking about going to be revenue bonds?
Yes, and I'm going to get into detail on those before we wrap up today, Steve. So you're right on pace. That's exactly right. They'll all be revenue bonds, solely revenue secured, no property tax backing for any of them.
That's fine. I understand. So we also have the possibility of having some insurance money coming back related to this project. So if that money comes back in, how is that money used, or can that money be used to pay down or pay back or buy back some of these revenue bonds on an early basis?
Yeah, that's going to be part of our considerations here, Steve. I think one of the things we want to do is maintain as much flexibility as possible. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we have that existing debt from 2020 that's outstanding. That's part of the reason we had the user rate adjustments for sanitary sewer and solid waste during the summer, just to meet those requirements. We need to be mindful of the outstanding debt, what we're issuing, and then the timing. So right now, we've been setting up the sizing here and the authority, assuming nothing comes back to the city. I think we all have confidence that there's going to be some dollar amount, the scale of which and the timing of which are something we're going to be thoughtful of. By breaking up and staggering the financing, road use tax first, hopefully we'll have more resolution to those considerations before the remaining portion of the financing plan.
So what is the typical length of revenue bonds? Can you vary the length of revenue bonds to time this out as well?
Yeah, so we can issue the debt. There's no statutory limitation in Iowa on revenue secured debt, unlike with property tax backed debt. So your GO bonds that you issue are limited for 20 years to the day from closing to final maturity. For revenue debt, it's really about what investor would let you borrow. If the USDA were doing a financing, not the case here for you guys. 40 years is the standard term through that source of funding. We've seen some really crazy stuff when rates were low, 50 years or even century bonds out in the marketplace. Right now, from our modeling perspective, we're looking at a 20-year financing here. And despite the increase in interest rates that we've seen, we think that's reasonable because of the useful life of the asset being financed. You know, realistically, you could justify a longer time horizon. These are details that we can come back to council and further support, but that's the thought process at this time as we frame this up for council's review.
Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Grant.
Michael Grant Harper here.
Mhm.
This is just a very general question that isn't about your proposed structure on how this funding architecture will work. But it's one I just wanted to get on the table. I think we have some experience with some recent large projects that the city has done that ought to inform the level of contingency planning that we build in on this.
Yeah.
And I think there are some market conditions that influence that the contingency amount. I guess what I'm really trying to say here is I don't want to be overly, in this case, conservatism doesn't tell me to be frugal in our contingency planning. Given the experience over the last 2.5 years, I think being conservative tells us to be a little bit more generous in terms of what we might assume we need for a contingency, so that we're not surprised at the closing phases of this project. So that's just a concern I have. And I just wanted to get it on the table. It doesn't have bearing on the, the detail that you and Steve were just covering.
Grant, you made a good point there. We've worked with staff to get a good feel for those project costs. Again, a number of those items have been bid and will continue to be bid. I have one of the attachments that was in your memo for tonight's meeting as a slide here later in the presentation, and I'll walk you through exactly that, Grant. I tend to agree with you. I wanted to be able to show the work there and understand that's exactly where we're trying to frame this up as well, to make sure we're going to be flexible there, not have to come back and repeat this process with you in the future.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. So with that, let's go to slide 6. This was from our presentation a month ago, and I think staff is working this. This is part of our strategy here, and we're now implementing our strategy. This sticks to this project as well. I guess we'd be project 3 in this case, right? So we've got different funding sources by project. We're working through this, and the allocation of those goes back to the previous slide on who's responsible for what share. This builds into our bigger plan for the CIP. This is a component of that, a large component of it, but want to be clear that this is all part of the big picture approach that we've been taking. Let's go to the next slide. So the road use tax element of this, I've discussed the road use tax funding a little bit with you guys in the past. Again, talking around $5 million or so as an expectation for annual revenues. And yes, there's other needs for the road use tax fund each year as budgeted. We're looking to leverage those revenues, and based on the kind of 20-year structure that I just mentioned to Steve's question, we'd be talking about $1.3 to $1.5 million per year being leveraged for debt repayment. We're not talking about addressing the 2020 note right now. The 2020 notes were set up as 10-year structures with modest repayment in the first 9 years and balloon payments in 2030. They're set up to be refinanced closer to that date. There is currently no early call provision for those. So that's something we're going to need to address down the road. On the road use tax piece, that's something we're going to work around because we've got plenty of coverage otherwise. So there'll be more details to come on the road use tax fund financing, as that'll be the first to follow. But because of the ease of access, again, this is a state controlled revenue stream. The disbursements go to the city on a monthly basis. It is pretty clear our path to the market and marketing for these bonds. It's also the largest share of the total. We want to make sure we can get this in place and closed to reduce any impact on other city funds to be able to manage the project construction cash flows that we expect to need to navigate starting early next spring. That's the key to our focus and why the road use tax piece will come first. Let's go to the next slide. From the sewer fund standpoint, we talked in late spring, early summer, as part of the user rate consideration and discussion, that we set rates and charges to be able to cover the debt service on the Series 2020 note. It's the same structure with half the payments as the road use tax note. And for us to be able to issue this additional debt, we're likely going to need to either address that with the lender on the 2020 notes or defease that debt. We can talk about those details another time, but we basically want to include some hearing authority for refinancing the 2020 loan so we can avoid having to do that hearing step later. So that's going to be included in the proceedings that you see at the next council meeting in a couple weeks. I wanted to just set the stage for that. We'll follow up on this on kind of the summary slide and a couple slides here. The structure and timing of this is going to need to flow into not only the existing 2020 loan, but also the other capital needs of the sanitary sewer system. Right now, we're expecting the payments for this public services element to be about $500,000 to $600,000 per year. That's the share that they're going to have on the sewer fund. Let's go to the solid waste fund before summarizing a little bit further. Similar to the sanitary sewer side, we evaluated and addressed the solid waste rate adjustments this summer to cover those same debt service considerations. We're also going to need to consider these loan covenants. Again, the utility revenue pledge means we've got to be able to show potential investors we can repay this debt and any additional debt that's existing. A little bit larger portion on the solid waste fund, expected payments for the solid waste side about $600,000 to $650,000 will be the considerations on the solid waste side for how we're going to be paying for that. So let's go to the next slide and just talk about those not to exceed amounts. This information ties back to Grant's comments a moment ago. This was an attachment in the memo in your council packets. What we're articulating here are the project costs, potential for funding a required reserve by investors, and then a kind of rounded not to exceed amount that we can use for the proceedings. So let's start with the sewer revenue piece, kind of items A and B up above. It's 12% of the facility costs, about 2.9 million. We're talking about a potential reserve fund of around $500,000, and then a not to exceed amount on the new public safety costs of about 3.8. We would also include that potential refinancing or defeasance of the 2020 note with some contingency for an all-in not to exceed amount of 6.8 million. Grant, to your point, that's probably more cushion than we would typically be looking at, but to maintain flexibility here, I think that's important to include at this time. The other point that I want to make, I think was very clear in the memo to the council, is that the public hearing amounts for financing do not obligate even $1 to be spent. So as things change, evolve, etc., this is not obligating financing, this is gaining authority, and we should keep that in mind over the next couple meetings while we go through the authorization process. More details be forthcoming on the financing plans as those proceed. Similar with solid waste, project costs, reserve fund, and the rounded amounts up for sizing purposes. Again, we're not expecting to issue that much, but we want to make sure that we've got that rounding if anything were to shift, change, etc. We think we've got fairly good numbers here, so hopefully there's plenty of contingency, but I think this is a modest approach. On the road use tax side, again, at this time, we didn't identify the need to necessarily defease or refinance the road use tax debt based on the state funding, but we still have some contingency in the sizing there in terms of the proposed not to exceed amount to provide to Dorsey, your bond counsel, for the public hearings to be forthcoming at the next council meeting. It doesn't total exactly what's here because we include the refinancing portions, but Grant, to your point, we had about 24 million of additional project costs. Yes, we think we might have some offsets from litigation or the insurance claims, but even though it's 24 million of project costs with reserves and contingency and rounding, we'd have hearing authority for about 29 million based on what we're projecting here. Again, much better to set that bound high now and not use it than set it too low and have to be coming back through this process again on short notice. It's a good amount to digest here. Let me wrap up on a couple slides and then answer any questions, and staff can fill in the blanks. Slide 11, just for this process steps, you're going to be asked to start the public hearing process at the next council meeting. The bid packages are coming in. We've got obligations for spend. We should have authority for the financing sources. We just want to get those aligned here sooner than later. We've modeled out a cash flow projection we hope is conservative that would look to require funding by spring of 2023. Leanne with the Treasury can move some things around in an interim period, but we don't want to have too much runway where we're waiting for financing to come in, where we're using reserves or transfers for those contractor invoices. So the goal here would to make sure funding's in place with the road use tax series in time for this spring 2023 period. Obviously, the other big timeline, just because our snapshot for our fiscal year is June 30th, making sure we have sufficient financing in place where we're not showing deficits on these project funds. The focus would be then after the hearing to get things rolling on the road use tax financing. And while we're working hot and heavy on budget, expecting in early January to have some additional details here for the road use tax financing to be able to get that issued in February, closed in March as necessary to keep with that cash flow. My last slide here, just again, to reiterate Leanne's comments, that this is it's a detailed and large component of our large term strategic planning, right? This is part of the city's strategic plan. We've been building this over the course of the year. We're working to implement this strategy as part of the CIP discussions that we'll continue to refine. But this is the step of gaining that authority, talking about the financing plan. The utility rate setting is going to follow through with that as part of our comprehensive approach as we work through the CIP. I appreciate there's a lot thrown at you. I know staff's been working particularly diligently in the last few months as we head into budget. But the goal here, as Ryan's articulated, is this is kind of the growing pains this first year to get everything aligned. But once we have this, we're going to have a ton of capacity going forward, and we're going to have continuity with this approach. So these types of details will be some of the things that you're used to seeing, not project specific, obviously, but in terms of our planning, getting out in front and being able to implement the plan that we're talking to you about. So with that, I'll shut up for a little bit here. If there's any questions, obviously, and if staff has anything to add, now would be the time to do that. I appreciate your time and attention here today.
Thank you, Michael. Questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, Michael or Leanne, you had the summary slide that broke down the sewer revenue, hearing, monetary values, solid waste, and road use tax. Can we back up to that?
Slide 10.
That's it. Thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding you clearly relative to the contingency level that we're building in to the total project estimation as well as its funding structure. So using just sewer revenue as the example, the project cost, and I'm going to just look at line A, project costs of $2.9 million.
Yep.
And then the not to exceed funding authority, that's grant speak, not finance speak, is 3.8 million. So the difference between those of nominally 900K is the contingency that's we're assuming.
Yeah, I would say that what you're saying is contingency grant would cover the reserve fund, which I've got shown there, right? Net issuance costs and bond premium discount, and then contingency. So the typical way to do this when we're building something out on a revenue secured financing is to take the project cost and the reserve fund that I've got listed there. You add those together at a 7 to 10% escalator. I use the high side and then round to the nearest 100,000. So that's how we got to the 3.8, 3 million, so on and so forth. That's probably on the high side of what I'd use, but for your same considerations there, I wanted to make sure we were on the high side in terms of what we were showing and show the work.
Okay, kind of a simplistic way that I, at least in the past, have thought about this with various inputs is there is a discerned total project cost of X.
Yep.
And then based on a collection of inputs, you know, whether it be labor or supplies, materials, whatever, you add a multiplier of 1 1.3x. And so I guess is there a representation of the total project that can show it in that sort of a view? At some point, I know what you're trying to do here relative to the funding structure. I'm just trying to simplify it and look at it from the aggregate. We have a project to do, it costs X. How
Yep.
much of that is contingency?
Yep, that's just a different formatting of this grant. I can send that to staff and get you that for Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, and then.
Yeah, clarification on the reserve fund.
Yep.
I know when we have our budget meetings for all of these funds, we've talked about wanting to have targeted reserve funds. So are we talking about using some of this financing to further establish and build up those reserve funds, which will help for the covenants that'll be included in all of these debt instruments?
I'll phrase that just a little bit different, Steve. So the reserves we've been talking about, kind of a rainy day operating funds, would be separate and distinct from what's articulated here. These reserve funds would likely be demanded from the investors. Typically, it'd be equal to about 1 year's annual debt service payment.
Right.
Because the structure is going to be a little goofy.
For the covenants.
Exactly. It'd be part of the covenants.
Right.
Typically, we would include that in the borrowing. These will be tax exempt, or most of them should be tax exempt. And we'd be able to be restricted just by the IRS limitation for that. Again, these are probably on the high side. I wouldn't count it as part of your, kind of days cash on hand consideration. They'd be truly restricted funds, whether you fund them with bond proceeds, as I've got shown here, or with cash on hand, which the city could choose to do if it wanted to.
So these reserve funds here we're talking about are
Bond
really
specific.
more being mandated by the debt instruments.
Correct. And again, we've gotten away from this, doing this 100% of the time.
Right.
But I don't want to be on the short side with that, or project costs or contingencies, and then come back to you guys in the spring, last minute, saying, hey, you need a special meeting so we can get an extra $500,000 of authority. So rather put everything up front here. We'll work to reduce that burden to the extent possible when it comes times for financing.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah?
It's been a few years since I've worked extensively with the road use tax fund. So my question is, does this take from our allocation, and what percentage of our allocation from the road use tax fund pays for the facility that would have paid for roads?
So
Does
if
that
you
make
look at
sense?
it,
Or is that
yeah.
coming in a different area?
It does make sense. I think the question is balancing that, and staff's talked a little bit about how we're going to get that structured. But if you look at the city receiving, let's call it 5 million, maybe a little bit more than 5 million in payments of 1.3 to 1.5, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% to 30% of the total state receipts going towards debt service to repay this project.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so what's next on this?
As Michael alluded to, we would have a resolution setting public hearing for the road use financing on the next set of council meetings.
The ones later in October, the second, November.
November, yes.
The second. set
Second
of
meeting
meetings
in November, and in the memo, again, referencing the memo laid out the full calendar.
Okay. Anything else?
I just want to say that the staff spent a considerable amount of time on this. It's not just my eyes that have been asking for a ton of details. There's a lot to pull together in a project this size. So everyone from Public Works to Finance want to just thank everybody's time and attention on this so we could bring it to council in a well thought out format.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Yes.
Mayor, if I can, I sent an email to the council last night that, and what we're talking about here is a project specific, but what you are seeing is the efforts of the work that Leanne and the finance team and the department heads have been doing with DA Davidson as we're evolving our budget process, as we're growing up from a budget standpoint, as we're better identifying and gathering data, and using that data to be very strategic in how we're budgeting, how we're using the funds, how we're preparing for projects. So this project, the public services facility was already in action. So DA Davidson's coming in midstream as this project's going on. So the conversation about, you know, that we're in the midst of some change and growing up, we're seeing this. And so as Michael had alluded to earlier in his presentation, that this type of analysis and this type of presentation is what you can expect early on, much earlier on, as we get into the aquatic center and other projects, as we get into the budget process. So when we're talking about CIP, to Councilwoman Menser's question about what is this doing for the road use tax and how are we funding roads? So we're looking holistically at the entire budget, the CIP, the different funds, and how all the actions that we are taking as part of the budget process or financing a project is impacting everything else. So we'll have a comprehensive, holistic view at this. So while we're talking specific about the public services facility, I do want to identify that there is a overarching strategy here that we're deploying, and it's going to be really exciting when we can have some more time under our belt as this gets developed.
Anyone else? Anything? Any questions? All right, thank you. For the next item, I'll turn over the meeting to Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Who's running this one? Anybody?
So included in the packet was a letter that was received by Genesis Equity regarding a request for some assistance with planning the location at 27th Street and at the roundabout north on 7th Avenue. You guys have received the request. Hannah is in the audience. And as you noted, there's a desire to understand a little bit more about what the council likes to see on the property, and they've entered the request for some planning assistance from the city.
So anybody have any comments they want to, I mean, what exactly are you looking for?
I think, Tom, if you go to the next slide, Tom, you can control it too. So Genesis has requested the council provide partner with them in evaluating the site. That was the subject of some council action a couple of meetings ago. So if you look at this slide and then the next slide, please. Thank you. These are the layouts, or this is what the development agreement contemplates. So in this one, potential mixed use, medical, retail, office. So there was one version, the previous version was what was recorded, and then in correspondence with Genesis earlier this year as part of the previous request that they had of the council, they identified that this was also factored into that development agreement. So really the question for the council, as the staff sees it, is do you still feel comfortable with these potential developments, medical, retail, office, potential mixed use on the site? If the answer is you are not comfortable with this and you'd like to see something else, then staff would recommend, yes, partnering with Genesis in bringing on a RDG to help master plan that site a little bit more detailed. If the council is comfortable with this, I think that's where more of the discussion would have to happen with the council level. But Hannah's here I don't know if you have anything you want to articulate as it relates to your request to the council. But that's really the crux of the question on behalf of staff. So I don't know, Hannah, if you have anything else you want to add.
Good evening. I think we spent a fair amount of time giving some consideration to drafting the letter, so I'll let that speak for itself as far as our request and previous correspondence goes. But I think it's a good opportunity for us to collaborate proactively as council and, as the developer, owner of the project, and make sure that we have a site specific to what you'd like to see. Ultimately, I feel that we are left after the last discussion with a few more questions than we have answers. That gives us an opportunity to work through what council would really like to see as ideal there. Ultimately, I think the desire we would have is that at least something be taken for action on Thursday's agenda, if possible, to make a decision as to whether or not this request would be granted or not. But happy to answer any questions otherwise.
Is Medco working with you for the site?
No, we have not been working with Medco, no.
So this maybe is more a question for staff, but Hannah, I'm looking at the letter that you sent in. It states similar to has been done with other Gateway and Premier properties within Marion, we asked the city to contract for a comprehensive concept plan for the property that includes multiple concepts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I take that to mean that there's a financial partnership between the city and Genesis Equities to produce that work product. And so my question really is, have we done that before with developers where there's a financial relationship to create a property concept for development?
On a larger scale, the Rookwood plan, the sub-area plan east of Highway 13 north of the airport, Chad Pelly came forward, indicated that he wanted to annex about 120 or more acres. We went forward and said, hey, why don't we enter into an agreement? Or we really didn't enter into an agreement. We had a conversation about moving forward doing a planning study, and the city actually prepared the plan holistically. Now, we did not only his property, but went all the way out to Hinman Road and up to Fernall and created but we've done that. We started down the road with the Holloway property on the northwest corner of Highway 13 and 151, and went through a number of concepts and iterations for development of that property as well, under the auspice of the sub-area planning activity. So, so we did pay for those plans.
So recognizing that this is of a smaller scale than that effort, in rough numbers, what do you think developing some concepts for this property would cost through somebody like RDG?
So I did reach out to RDG. I got a rough scope. They said between $10,000 and $15,000 to get to some concept plans. After some interviews with the city, the developer and their team, they would kind of come together and say, this is a project that would be supported by all parties. They would also use the Leland report as a basis for some of that conversation as well. We would get, I will call them fairly good illustrations. You've seen what RDG can do. And then if we want the developer, whoever wants the fully refined concepts, those would be additional costs in the $2,000 range. So everything I've received thus far has just been via email through a 15-minute conversation. So it's not a formal scope, but before this came to council, I wanted to make sure that we had an idea of cost associated with something like this activity.
So you've responded to what was in my mind as I looked at this. We have past precedents to do this, and you have some general bracketing of the potential cost to produce some concept design. So that's what I was interested in. Thanks.
Steve. Yeah, I mean, I understand we have paid for some and got involved in master plans in the past. But I think in each case, we've supported it because there was a larger benefit to the city because of the large scale of the project. In each case, the neighborhood at Indian Creek, this, talking about Chad Pelly's project, we're talking about, 100 to 150 acres of land in each case. So getting involved in those types of projects, I think is important to the city to make sure it gets laid out right. There's no contradictions. Anybody wanting to do development on a larger scale like that, I think it's important to know how it lays out. When I look at this smaller scale, I'm not sure it warrants the city spending city money for it. It's a smaller scale project. In my opinion, what we talked about a couple of months ago was not necessarily what we're in favor of. It was more about what we did not like about the project, which was the car wash. So that aspect is what I think was a problem a couple of months ago. The rest of it was fine. So it seems to me that on a smaller scale that the city should not get involved.
Anyone else? I'll comment that I don't, like kind of what Steve's saying, I don't see if RDG did a master plan for this location, how that would help with the redevelopment of it. I mean, I think you can see, we know where the roads are going to go in, the entrances to the location. We've got some basic renderings already for what can go there. And I think like what Steve said too, like the restaurant pads that were there in the last, what was brought forward before. I mean, that I didn't see an issue with those. I just don't see how hiring someone to do a master plan is beneficial. Would that help sell the property? I wouldn't think so. Just having some pretty renderings. So. Since this is a discussion, I guess, is something going to be on the agenda for Thursday?
This is not, the agenda item is the receive and file the letter. Today is more of discussion and direction. So, and council doesn't need to take action today. If you needed more time to think about it, we can put it on for Thursday as direction. But if there's a level of comfort now, we'd ask so we can give some clarity to Hannah and the rest of Genesis.
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of resonates in my thinking from the past, our past meeting on this, and Steve highlighted the car wash, which, I think was kind of the tripwire in the whole consideration. But for multiple considerations that I've been part of over the last couple of years with council, I've continually heard the notion about gateway properties. And so we've certainly seen concepts that incorporate the fact that it's an important piece of property and an important location, and we want it to have a certain look, feel, ambiance, presence, that supports the total city image. And I guess the question, at least in my mind, is did the original development agreement incorporate that vision? And is that original development agreement, given the change in the real estate landscape in the last 3 years, is that viable? And so if the answer is yes, it was thought of as a gateway property, and two, that concept that was presented as part of the development agreement, if that is still a viable a viable model to try to develop that property to. It just seems to be that we just, somehow stimulate that. But if what was originally proposed is no longer viable, and then the question is, how do we recalibrate that with an objective of having a gateway property? And I don't know that leads I don't know if that leads me to a conclusion on this, other than times have changed potentially. And, our focus on a gateway property and what the attributes of that are. Now, how do we update that notion? And, how do we achieve that? I think that's really kind of what we're talking about. But it seems to me, as long as it is vacant and not generating a revenue flow for the city, that's disadvantageous as well. That's true. And so, how do we move this off of where it's sitting today? I think confirmation of the original development agreement is worthwhile. Is that viable in this market? And if so, then let's do it. If not, then somehow we have to figure out a way to redefine it. But I would say if that sits vacant for another 6 to 12 months, we will have lost potentially, based on either direct, indirect, or induced economic activity. We're going to have lost whatever money it would cause us to draw the pictures. So I just don't want to be sitting still for something that in this total scheme of things is kind of trivial.
I see where you're coming from with your comments there, but are the pretty pictures actually going to make it sell and be redeveloped? Because
I would defend on Tom's staff to tell us that.
I say,
Well, I don't know that, this is just speaking on being involved in the whole conversation from start to finish. I don't think it's the pretty pictures, quote unquote, the pretty pictures are what the end product is necessarily for just to sell the property. I think the concept is there's been some discussion with council and the developer about what exactly should go there, to Grant's point. If 3 buildings came in, one wasn't a car wash, would that have been satisfactory to the council? And if that's so, then maybe it's not such a big deal. But with the Leland report, there was a mixed use plan. There was a much grander thought process. In the original agreement, there was a contemplation that this would be a high valued medical grade type office facility. Is that something you would like to see? Or are we going to be okay with 3 smaller buildings or a mixed use development, like, single story storefronts? That I think is a question, because, but for engaging in a larger conversation about what that site should be, I don't think you're going to see the projects that you've seen in the Leland Court report come forward. So, the conversations that we have relative to hotels in this community are not driven primarily by a single developer. Medco is involved in those conversations. So I guess that's the question, and that's to the council. I mean, I think the communication between the 2 parties to create something that everybody supports and to be able to market it is the direction I think that everybody, or that's what Genesis is hoping to move forward with. From a planning perspective, I would contend that makes some sense based on the original intent of the agreement, which was to have a very high level and kind of a gateway type project in this location. But I mean, that's for you guys to kind of work through. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay, so to respond to one of your comments, Tom, is that I think we made comments a couple of months ago that we do acknowledge that times have changed, that the market has changed.
Sure.
And this city council has made accommodations to entities in the past because of that exact fact. So I think related to Are we expecting really high-end medical buildings and all of that that may have been talked about 5 years ago? The answer from me is no. We recognize that times have changed. And I would certainly personally say I'm really fine to be flexible on what might be proposed on that. So what was proposed a couple months ago, I was fine with 2/3 of it. One part I was not. So if they want to put something else on that spot, I'll probably be fine with that concept. I just wasn't a big fan of having a car wash on that land when we're really talking about what the other uses could be. So I'm not saying it has to be clear to the high end and set the expectations there. I agree, times have changed. The market is not what it was, 5 years ago. It's changing. It may change again in the future. So I'm fine to be flexible under that concept. So I guess that's my response to what you talked about there.
Did the Leland report give us confirmation that office space and mixed commercial, I think that's what they had. Did it give us confirmation that that's viable in this here and now environment?
I think there was limited offices, as I recall. I could be wrong on that, but I think they were looking at more mixed commercial more than office. But yeah, I mean, they cited a couple different examples of projects that could be, could be.
So I am cautiously thinking I shouldn't even say this, but why would I let caution get in my way? One of the other attributes here is, if it's restaurants, which was, I think, part of the 2/3 plan that we most recently saw, are we becoming geographically too restaurant dense? Question mark. I don't know the answer to that. But then the other end of it is, if it's, I don't know if one of the models out of Leland was residential and mixed commercial, question mark. Again, the same density question comes in. Are we inadvertently going directions that create negative competition amongst, the commercial entities in our city? And maybe you never worry about that. People develop it. Anyway, like I said, I should have been cautious and not even brought that up.
I think it was really about, I mean, you see this like, it's great, but it's also, I look at it, and maybe I'm really simple. I guess I'm a really simple person. But with any of these going forward, I look at it and just say, if I'm driving into a community that is considered to be a community where I want to be, live, have people come to, tourists to visit, and I drive through this community and you try to drive through it with a lens of somebody who's not been here or somebody who's new. What am I seeing? We've spent decades cleaning up this section, and y'all were involved right in the middle of that. I mean, you're the critical part of that. What do we want people to see and think of us when they're driving into the community? And I don't think that any of us have the expertise, especially coming off what we did, to say that that what is in the report was going to work, that are people coming back into office buildings? I mean, we're just all in this weird space right now of trying to figure out what commercial looks like going forward. But I'm kind of like you, like even the other plan, I liked all of it except for the one part of it. And I just think when we put something there, when people drive in, are they going to our community? Wow. Like this is a really nice community, or is it, oh my gosh, what is that? How did that end up in the middle of whatever? And I think that's really it. And I don't have a great definition, and I know you're probably looking for it, but I think that's where I kind of came from with it. Do I know if it's retail? I don't know. Is it restaurant? Maybe. Office? That'd be great. Mixed use seems to be the way a lot of places are going. Will it be that way in 20 years? Don't know. But I think it was the last plan. It was the one It wasn't that it wasn't what was proposed, it was the one section of the proposal that was
Yeah.
based. So that's just my,
And maybe this conversation will help with what the request maybe was being requested for was clarity.
Council, if I could just, maybe, this is just a question because I don't know the answer to it, but is this something that is worth taking a look at when we're trying to decide, when we talk about flexibility and when we talk about getting on the same page as what we want to see? We have a lot of questions that we just don't really have the answers to. So my question would be, is there some value in having assistance to get us going in the same direction?
Go ahead.
to me, this is a microcosm of the whole area. So is there other planning or other purposes that tie this all together so that it isn't one parcel dictated, but that is looking at, again, we've got the design standards, all that goes into this gateway that is kind of in a canvas. That's where I see, like, how do we tie it to the whole vision?
Exactly how I thought of it. Answer your question is if you were doing it from 27th to whatever street, 15th, doing a plan for all of that, then potentially, because then that'd be a larger scale. Is that what you were asking?
I am asking that, but
Okay.
asking it on a smaller scale. You know, when we talk about flexibility and we talk about how do we get this off, like Grant, how do we get this off the mark? How do we do that? And get a little more specific on what we're looking for? Or do you just leave it, do we leave it broad?
One more quick comment.
Sure.
Okay. So I think to the couple of points, really the request is ultimately about clarity, right? Like that is ultimately what this is about. We've got the two concepts that are from the original development agreement. As Grant's mentioned, times have changed. Clearly, it's been marketed for quite some time, and this is the only bona fide offer that we've had on a development of that whole site. We've had other ones that have wanted to skinny it down and split it into smaller parcels and take one of the acres or another, but the general feedback that we've gotten has been the same. So fast forward to the last meetings with the Leland report, obviously left a lot of questions because there's a very big difference between what the Leland report suggested to go there and even what our development agreement shows in contrast to what was being presented. So it's helpful to hear that you guys are open to the flexibility of having smaller sites that are commercial, limited, maybe not to something such as a car wash, but as an example of that, the site that was proposed, the project that was proposed there is within the current zoning standards. So if there's other things that are also within the current zoning standards that are not desirable, these would be helpful things for us to understand so that when we're marketing this, you know, this taints it a little bit to have had a project that meets otherwise the commercial criteria, the zoning criteria, the number value wise of the development criteria of the development agreement, and then not have it be approved. So we're challenged now with how do we market this and give some confidence to the very few buyers that there are right on the market right now, looking at sites like this, specifically in Marion. You know, some confidence that when they spend a decent chunk of money, like they're going to have to bring a proposal in front of you, that it's going to be supported. That's the clarity that we need, is to make sure that we're giving them upfront feedback, we're marketing it properly, and that we aren't sending people on a wild goose chase for several months process to get a no. So that's what ultimately we're looking for.
Council, what is it based on what Hannah had talked about with the clarity regarding the uses? And I don't know if this is as perhaps the best route would be to sit down and take a look at the development agreement itself and go through that process of identifying those and having conversations with council about what uses would not be, and specifically going through that exercise. Throw that out as kind of a bridge that gap. If the master planning process is not the key, and two of the three options that were presented were satisfactory to the council, and if it's about getting clarity about what those uses are, does that make sense to go back and
And I think having the most flexibility obviously is the most desirable, just simply
Right.
because we're gonna have the most options. If we limit it too much, it's not gonna be
Yeah.
easily marketed, so.
Well, Ryan, I was just gonna suggest something like that. It just seems, get a few stakeholders together, a few experts. And go through a process to, at least reacquaint what was the original development agreement and what do we know about a change in the market? And then obviously, Hannah, your team has kind of a view as to what other developers or builders are interested in, or people who are going to buy the property. Maybe there's a triangulation on that we can all find a common focal point. Just as Ryan was saying, that then causes us to, identify what's viable there and bring that back to council. And we don't have to spend a dime, Mr. Jensen.
seeing a couple nodding heads. If that's the case, then we can go back and partner with Hannah and Genesis and come up with perhaps some possible revisions to the development agreement that provides the clarity. Obviously, we can take our best stab at it and present it to council, and if council's not provide feedback to us, and at the end of the day, if the council's not happy with the end product, then that's also some clarity. So,
Sounds good.
thank you.
Anything else? Anybody? Nope. All right, thank you.
Okay, this brings us to the last item on the agenda, which is closed sessions.
Mayor, move to adjourn to closed session regarding personal matters permitted under sections 21.5(1)(I) of the Code of Iowa.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn to closed session regarding personnel matters as permitted under section 21.51(I) of the Code of Iowa. We have the legal counsel statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. I've reviewed the proposed subject matter for the closed session and find the same to be appropriate under Iowa Code Section 21.51(I).
Okay, any discussion before we vote? Roll call, please.
Mr. Harper,
Yes.
Mr. Jensen.
Yes.
Ms. Atkins,
Yes.
Mayor Abu Osley.
Yes.
Mr. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Menzer,
Yes.
Mr. Sterned.
Yes.
Okay, we're adjourned to closed session. Thank you.